yet more competitions. Even the charity programmes Children in Need, Comic Relief and Sports Relief featured fake winners. The Director General says there is no excuse for deception. It is time, he says, to put our house in order.
Trust and honesty with the public is more important than anything else.
Dan, what are we standing on?
A driveway?
Yeah.
So Dan Penteado, whatever his name is, that guy off the Rogue Traders, he's been banged up in prison for stealing benefits.
It was in fact Dan Penteado's fame that brought him down. He pleaded guilty to over £24,000 worth of fraud. It was of course his job as part of the roles he had on Watchdog and Rogue Traders to try to protect the public from being ripped off. In the event, the court heard he had stolen over £24,000 of money from the public purse. It's money that Bournemouth Borough Council say they're determined to get back.
August 2013, and NATO leaders can't get the public on side for the imminent bombing of Syria. Suddenly, the BBC says it was filming a small rural hospital, and a game-changing atrocity happens right there, the moment they were filming.
We were filming the doctors working at this hospital when victims of an incendiary bomb attack on a school playground started pouring in.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of napalm.
But a highly sceptical public stayed hostile to military intervention. Exactly 1 month later, the leaders are trying to pin a chemical weapons attack on Syria without success. The BBC airs exactly the same footage but digitally alters the word napalm for, quote, chemical weapons, hoping no one will notice.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of chemical weapon.
Not only did folks notice, but it unleashed a massive public investigation, which made some extremely disturbing findings.
This is the total fabrication. From beginning to end of an atrocity with BBC reporter Ian Pannell standing amidst a tableau of very bad actors. This is completely beyond the pale.
This audio analysis by media investigator Robin Upton shows both versions are identical and from the same speech. The BBC then digitally altered the words from napalm to chemical weapon, the exact justification NATO was finding difficult to prove.
Media is really important to me, and of course how it gets across certain truths to the population. And what we're seeing with the BBC is an institution that's really just seems to be giving the views of the establishment. And obviously a lot of these people are realising it, so that's why they're here, I hope.
We were talking on the way up here today, and we were saying how sort of maybe 6 months ago I'd completely trust the BBC, and now this has all come out and the lying and the deceit. I'm completely shocked, and if they've deceived us in this way, how do they deceive us in other ways and all the news?
I've got a funny feeling the BBC aren't going to listen, so this is only going to be protest 2 of maybe 3 or 4, and I would imagine the numbers are going to double every time there's a protest. And pretty much I stopped paying my licence after Jimmy Savile was defended by them, and I'm never going to pay them another penny, and a lot of people are like me.
What began with 5 women claiming in an ITV documentary to have been sexually assaulted by Sir Jimmy Savile has now snowballed.
Silence has been shattered. Caroline Moore was just 30.
Another woman who says she was abused 40
Karen
years
Moore
ago.
told ITV 40 potential. Some from the Broadmoor Hospital. There seems to be no end to the complaints.
Newsnight's inquiry into Jimmy Savile last year started a chain of events that was to prove eventually disastrous for the BBC.
It was the BBC who made Savile a star, but their handling of the revelations has put the broadcaster's reputation in jeopardy.
Obviously, a lot of people knew about it. A lot of people knew what was going on. A lot of people didn't say anything. They just let this guy do what he was doing, and he was allowed to just have carte blanche and just do what the hell he was doing. It's a very, very sick story, and there are a lot of people out there who kept quiet and allowed this to happen to the children.
I am appalled that this documentary was pulled when there was clearly enough evidence into a thorough investigation. And the fact is that not only did they pull the documentary at the 11th hour. They then went on to pay tribute to Jimmy Savile by celebrating his life.
Yeah.
And that to me is absolutely appalling.
Two programmes.
With two programmes. Appalling. Those people at the BBC, they knew that there was enough evidence that had come to public attention since Jimmy Savile died. They knew that they had lots of evidence. They pulled the documentary and they went on to do shows like celebrations of Jim will fix it and everything, and it's absolutely appalling.
Voices of common sense outside the BBC Broadcasting House, Portland Place, London. Here's what they had to say.
He will tell you lies! Who runs the BBC? The chairman of this trust is none other than Lord Chris Patten. He's paid £80,000 a year as an advisor for oil company BP. He's also paid £40,000 a year by EDF Energy. I think we all need to ask ourselves, if you were to seek an independent opinion on issues like climate change, on sky-high energy prices, on dangerous energy practices like fracking, tar sands, new nuclear and others, would you seriously be going to a paid employee of an energy company that is going to profit from these very dirty practices?
Entwistle decided he could no longer continue as the BBC's chief after a report aired on its flagship programme Newsnight earlier this month was found to have wrongly linked Conservative peer Lord McAlpine to child abuse.
In light of the fact that the Director General is also the Editor-in-Chief and ultimately responsible for all content, and in light of the unacceptable journalistic standards of the Newsnight film broadcast on Friday 2nd November, I have decided that the honourable thing to do is to step down from the post of Director General.
The BBC has been criticised by the Commons Public Accounts Committee and MPs over its excessive payout to the former BBC Director General George Entwistle, who quit in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal, saying it was a cavalier use of public money. Entwistle, who resigned, was paid £450,000 after just 54 days in the job. This payment, however, was criticised by the Commons Committee, who said it was out of line with public opinion.
That shows that the people at the top of the BBC just don't get it, because this is all about licence fee payers' money, your money and mine, taxpayers' money, being used in a way which just doesn't make sense in the current climate.
Mr Entwistle received £450,000, twice the amount he was entitled to if he'd resigned voluntarily. Former Deputy Director General Mark Byford got £949,000, and former Chief Operating Officer Caroline Thompson received £670,000 when she left earlier this year. Some have suggested that the BBC is actively rewarding failure and that more resignations or even sackings are now in order.
It's incredible that they can find that the whole management structure of the BBC is at fault of this whole affair, and yet at the end of it no one is going to get the sack, and those people who are going to be held responsible are being allowed to shuffle off with big payouts, big pension pots. They'll be moved to other jobs, probably on the same salary.
400 Palestinians are...
An appeal has been filed by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Friends of Al-Aqsa to try and get the BBC to explain whether it's justified in referring to Jerusalem as Israeli. In a case that's been ongoing since 2012, campaign groups have complained to the corporation's trust, the Information Commissioner's Office, and had a Freedom of Information request rejected, but they've vowed to fight on to prevent further misinformation.
Of course, Jerusalem isn't an Israeli city. It's divided at the moment. East Jerusalem is recognised by the United Nations international law as occupied Palestinian territory, and Israeli de facto control is only recognised over West Jerusalem. So for the BBC to refer to Jerusalem in its entirety as an Israeli city is inaccurate journalism, and it's also completely wrong under international law.
This controversy is not the first time BBC coverage and the corporation's editorial policy have been challenged by pro-Palestinian organisations. In fact, they've argued that for years the BBC seems intent on aping the official line coming out of Tel Aviv, leaving very little space for the Palestinian narrative. In 2011, producers censored the lyrics to a pro-Palestinian rap, editing out the word Palestine. The BBC, with the largest audience share in the UK and publicly funded, has a remit to remain impartial.
When you keep putting ideas into people's heads, Jerusalem is Israeli, Palestine isn't occupied, this isn't an occupation, it's a conflict, it's a war, the Palestinians are fighting the Israelis. Propaganda wins, it wins wars, misinformation wins wars. When journalists at the BBC are just spouting Israeli propaganda and refusing to correct it, and the BBC Trust, the highest level you can get to at the BBC, is backing them up, then you know that something is very, very wrong.
The Million Mask March. This was a global march of solidarity against political and economic corruption in 477 locations across the world. There were marches in every inhabited continent of the planet. Where were the BBC?
And another enormous issue that the BBC has barely covered is the US-EU trade agreement, the TTIP. It's a sort of evil twin of a thing called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's being negotiated across the world as well. And these are basically agreements that are designed to have secret corporate tribunals make decisions about how our economy works. Any regulation that a government puts in place to give rights to people, to protect the environment, anything that might make the costs that corporations have to cover greater, the corporations under these agreements can sue the governments for billions of dollars.
I'd just like to ask the BBC why we would report on the £1.2 billion worth of benefit fraud when we're not actually reporting on the £120 billion worth of tax evasion.
The NHS marched. 60,000 people marched. The Tory party conference in Manchester. Where were the BBC? BBC, don't tell the truth! BBC, don't tell the truth!
Fukushima, there is an impending humanity natural disaster going on there. There's 300 tonnes of contaminated water being leaked every day in the Pacific Ocean. Why are we not informed about this? Iceland, social revolution going on. They held their bankers accountable and they took them to court. Why are we not hearing about this? 99% of their energy is